We saw not one case of RSV or flu in the winter of 2020, 2021. That's amazing. So did we save lives doing that? Yes. Was it somewhat of an overreach? Yes, I do. I think we've learned that in retrospect. Then in 2020, but people didn't like that. They didn't like it. They thought this was government overreach. They thought it was way too heavy-handed. They thought it was delivered, that the messages were delivered in a pedantic and condescending manner, and they didn't feel they were part of the process, and that made them angry. And then the following year, in 2021, after we had a vaccine in December of 2020, you couldn't go anywhere unless you had your vaccine card. You couldn't go to your favorite bar or restaurant or sporting event or place of worship unless you had your vaccine card. And that too was seen as massive government overreach. And there was a lot of pushback on that. But did the vaccine work? Yes. Did those restrictive measures work? Yes. Should we have been a little more, I think, open about the deliberation process? For example, I was actually part of a group that included Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins from NIH and Rochelle Walensky from CDC and Vivek Murthy, who was a Surgeon General, to answer the question, should natural infection count as a vaccine? It makes perfect sense. It would. If you assume you survive natural infection, you definitely are immune, or you'll even immune in a better manner because now you have an immune response to all 4 viral proteins and not just the one in the vaccine. And we didn't do that. And I think that should have been an open, deliberative process when that process happened, so people could hear what was being said. So I think you're right, that I think that Dr. Fauci took a lot upon himself and therefore went from sort of hero to pariah, at least in the mind of some, because of that, the way that the messages were delivered. And that you were either on the bus or off the bus. I suffered that too at some level. And I didn't think the bivalent vaccine that we approved in June of 2022 was any better than what we had because of the immunological data, eventually because of the clinical data. And you couldn't say that. You really couldn't say that. I was on CNN saying it at one point. I wrote a perspective piece in the New England Journal of Medicine saying that. It was called the bivalent vaccine, a cautionary tale. And I got a lot of negative responses from public health people because I gotten off the bus. And I think you're right. You're either on the bus or off the bus. And that's not the way science works. The policies behind, or the science behind policy should always be debated openly. I'm trained as a scientist, and you wanted your science to be criticized, that's how it got better. And I feel like that didn't happen. That process didn't happen here.
I think you're absolutely right. I'm reading a book by Dr. Tom Mayer, and he talks about 2 things. And the title of the book is Leadership is Worthless, Leading is Priceless. And he talks about 2 things. In relationship to AI, he says, there's data, there's a knowledge that we glean from data, and then there's the ability that certain human beings have to get wisdom from that knowledge. Here we were behind the 8 ball because we had no data. We used the influenza model of dissemination as how COVID was going to be spread, because that's the only model for big pandemics that we know well at the CDC. And we went from no data to I have the wisdom and I talk and you listen. And the second one, which was just as harmful, which is what you're talking about, science is a nasty sport because we disagree. We see the same data and I see blue and green, and we fight it out until we really figure out whether it's blue, green, or magenta. And that's how we improve. And for that to happen, what Dr. Mayer talks about is, and I don't like the word, but is don't suck up. Don't believe the Catholic Church. They're not always right. Don't believe the CDC. They're not always right. Don't believe the NIH. They're not always right. And suck down. Listen to your patient. Because sometimes the patient knows more than the experts. And that is true of science. That was what was missing in this interchange, was when people that were not the anointed ones, the ones with the wisdom, spoke up and said, I don't think that doing it this way is helpful. They were shut down. They were silenced. They were not allowed in the room. They lost their academic appointments. They lost their jobs. And I think people that are very reasonable, because people have told me this, I can no longer trust you because you're part of that establishment of physicians that just follow the Grand Pumas. and don't think.
The computer thinks for you.
No,
So
but
wants
that's
the
where
computer to think for you.